In this episode, we are going to untangle a confusion that catches many new learners very early in security. People hear about directories, access review platforms, privileged account tools, single sign-on portals, and policy models, and it can start to feel like identity and access management, IAM, is just a pile of products with overlapping labels. That is where beginners often lose the bigger picture, because the real goal is not to memorize product categories or chase brand names. The real goal is to understand how identities are created, trusted, granted access, monitored, changed, reviewed, and eventually removed. A framework helps you think about that full journey in an organized way, while a tool helps carry out one or more parts of it. If you compare frameworks and tools without keeping that life cycle in view, you can end up impressed by features while missing the fact that the core access process is still broken. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.News in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A framework is best understood as a structured way of thinking about how access should work across an organization. It describes the decisions that need to happen, the responsibilities different teams carry, the controls that reduce risk, and the evidence that shows those controls are being followed. A tool is different because it is software or technology used to support part of that work. The framework tells you what problem must be managed and what good control should look like, while the tool helps you enforce, automate, record, or simplify some piece of that control. If you want a simple mental picture, a framework is like the rules and map for a transportation system, and a tool is like one vehicle moving across part of that map. The map matters because no single vehicle can show the whole system by itself. In IAM, that means no single product category should be mistaken for the entire discipline, even if it is very important and widely used. The lifecycle view is the anchor that keeps everything understandable. Access is not one event where someone logs in once and the story is finished. It begins when an identity is created or recognized, continues when that identity is authenticated, expands when permissions are granted, and keeps evolving as responsibilities change over time. At some point, access must be reviewed to make sure it still fits the current role, and eventually some or all of it must be removed when the need ends. A framework keeps those stages connected so the organization can ask who approved the access, why it exists, whether it is still appropriate, and what should happen when the identity changes. A tool may only handle one or two of those stages very well, and that is not a weakness as long as people understand what it does not cover. Trouble begins when teams assume a strong login tool, review tool, or privileged account tool somehow solves the whole lifecycle by itself. This matters because many IAM conversations get pulled toward tool categories before people understand the process those tools are meant to support. A directory can store identities. A login portal can simplify access to many applications. A review platform can help managers confirm permissions, and a privileged access product can tighten control around administrator activity. Each of those can be valuable, but none of them means the organization has a healthy IAM lifecycle from start to finish. A beginner can easily look at a polished dashboard and assume maturity exists because the technology looks advanced. In reality, an organization may have excellent authentication controls but still grant access with weak approvals, leave old permissions in place after role changes, or fail to remove access cleanly when people leave. That is why lifecycle thinking matters so much. It forces a basic but powerful question at every stage, which is whether the current tool actually supports the real access need, or whether it only makes one part of the experience look better. When people talk about frameworks in IAM, they are often describing a control approach rather than a product family. A framework may emphasize least privilege, meaning people should receive only the access they need for current work and no more. It may emphasize clear approval paths, separation of duties, periodic review, strong treatment of privileged accounts, and reliable deprovisioning when roles change or end. It may also define who owns identity data, who approves application access, who reviews entitlements, and who investigates exceptions. None of those ideas is tied to one specific tool. They are part of a broader control model that says how access should be governed across the organization. This is why frameworks stay useful even when technologies change. If a company replaces one product with another, the framework should still help answer the same core questions about need, trust, accountability, and proof. The tools can change, but the lifecycle responsibilities still have to be carried forward in some coherent way. One useful comparison point is the difference between foundational identity tools and lifecycle governance. Many environments rely on a central directory or identity store to hold user records, group memberships, and authentication relationships. That foundation is important because systems need a dependable place to recognize identities and connect them to access decisions. In many organizations, human resources, HR, data also plays an important role because employment status, manager information, and job changes can drive identity updates. Even so, a directory by itself does not explain why someone has access, whether the access was approved appropriately, or whether the permissions still match the current job. It is a foundation, not a full lifecycle manager. A beginner should learn to distinguish between a system that stores or presents identity information and a framework that governs how that information should lead to controlled access decisions. Without that distinction, it is easy to overestimate what a directory really does for security. Authentication and access tools are another major category that beginners hear about early, especially single sign-on, SSO, and multi-factor authentication, MFA. These tools are important because they help verify identity, reduce password sprawl, improve user experience, and make access harder to steal through simple credential compromise. They are often very visible to users because they affect daily logins, prompts, and account recovery. That visibility sometimes leads people to equate them with IAM as a whole, but that would be too narrow. SSO and MFA mainly improve how identities prove themselves and enter systems. They do not automatically decide whether a person should still have access to 10 applications inherited from 3 past roles, nor do they resolve old privileged accounts that were never cleaned up. A strong authentication tool can protect the front door while still letting someone walk into too many rooms once inside. That is why lifecycle thinking must stay in focus even when the login experience seems polished and secure. Identity governance and administration, IGA, tools usually get closer to the lifecycle view because they often support access requests, approvals, role mapping, review campaigns, and deprovisioning workflows. These tools can help organizations see who has access, route requests to the right approvers, and ask managers or system owners to confirm whether permissions still make sense. They are often where governance becomes more visible in daily operations. Even so, an IGA platform is not automatically the same thing as good governance. If the underlying job data is poor, if managers approve blindly, or if application integrations are incomplete, the tool may only automate confusion more efficiently. The value of the tool depends heavily on the surrounding framework that defines what should be approved, how roles are modeled, what counts as excessive access, and how often reviews must happen. This is a good lesson for beginners because it shows that some tool categories are more lifecycle aware than others, but none of them can replace the need for clear policy, ownership, and judgment. Privileged access management, PAM, tools are another area where category and lifecycle can get mixed together. These products focus on especially sensitive accounts and actions, such as administrator access, elevated sessions, shared privileged credentials, or temporary high-risk permissions. They may help vault secrets, rotate passwords, broker sessions, record privileged activity, or reduce standing administrative access. That makes them very valuable in environments where high-power accounts present outsized risk. At the same time, PAM is not a complete substitute for broader IAM control. An organization can have an impressive PAM system and still struggle with weak onboarding, poor access reviews, stale group memberships, or inconsistent deprovisioning across normal business applications. In other words, a company can protect some of its most dangerous keys while still losing track of many ordinary keys that open important rooms. The lifecycle view helps keep PAM in the right place, which is as a specialized and powerful part of the broader access control picture rather than the whole picture itself. Another comparison beginners should understand is between access control models and access tools. A model describes the logic behind how access decisions are made, while a tool is one way to enforce or support that logic. Role-based access control, or BAC, gives permissions based mainly on a defined job role or function. Attribute-based access control, ABAC, uses characteristics such as department, location, clearance level, device state, or other attributes to shape access decisions. These are not products sitting on a shelf by themselves. They are ways of organizing decision logic, and many tools may support one, both, or a blend of them. The lifecycle view matters here because the best model is not just the one that looks elegant on a diagram. It is the one the organization can maintain as people join, change roles, work across teams, need exceptions, and eventually leave. A model that looks precise but cannot keep up with real business change may create as much confusion as it solves. A simple example makes the comparison easier to follow. Imagine a new employee joining a company in a finance role. HR data may trigger identity creation, a directory may store the account, SSO may provide convenient application access, and MFA may strengthen login security. An IGA workflow may send the employee's access request to the right manager and system owner, while an RBAC model helps determine the normal set of permissions for that role. If the person later needs temporary elevated access for an audit project, a PAM tool might control that sensitive activity. Months later, a manager may review the employee's entitlements and remove permissions that no longer fit. If the person transfers to another department or leaves the company, deprovisioning should reduce or end the access completely. This example shows that several tools and models can participate in one coherent lifecycle, but the coherence comes from the framework and process, not from any one product category pretending to do everything on its own. When organizations compare frameworks and tools well, they usually focus on coverage, ownership, and connection rather than features alone. They ask whether the tool supports the actual stages of the access lifecycle they struggle with most. They ask who will own the process, who will maintain roles or attributes, who will approve access, and who will review evidence that controls are working. They also ask how the tool connects to real sources of truth, business applications, privileged environments, external partners, and non-human identities. A flashy feature matters less if the tool cannot fit into the organization's real approval paths and identity changes. This is one reason mature comparison takes patience. Good selection is not about picking the tool with the longest feature page. It is about understanding which framework decisions already exist, which lifecycle gaps are truly painful, and whether the proposed technology will reduce those gaps or simply make the environment more complicated. Several misconceptions are worth clearing away before they become habits. One is the idea that more tools automatically mean better security, when in fact too many disconnected tools can hide ownership problems and create blind spots between handoffs. Another is the belief that if a tool handles authentication well, then authorization and governance must also be under control. A third is the assumption that buying an IGA or PAM product somehow creates governance discipline by itself, even when managers are still approving access without context and system owners still do not know what groups really mean. Some beginners also dismiss frameworks as paperwork, but that misses the point. A useful framework is not there to create bureaucracy for its own sake. It exists so the organization can make consistent access decisions, understand responsibilities, handle change safely, and produce evidence that the lifecycle is actually being managed instead of merely assumed. Tools matter, but they become much more effective when those deeper questions are already being asked clearly. By the end of this discussion, the main lesson is that frameworks and tools should be compared from the perspective of the access lifecycle, not as isolated labels in a market chart. A framework gives the organization a durable way to think about identity, approval, trust, least privilege, review, change, and removal. A tool supports one or more parts of that work, sometimes in a broad way and sometimes in a specialized way, but never in a way that should erase the need for process and ownership. When you keep the lifecycle in view, product categories start to make more sense because you can see what stage they help with and where their limits begin. That helps beginners avoid a very common trap, which is mistaking a polished technology surface for a complete access strategy. Real IAM maturity comes from connecting the right tools to the right framework so that identities are managed from beginning to end with clarity, accountability, and control.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.